Good.
And I believe he wants to talk about identity politics, which is something he's passionate about. And we've done a bit of research ourselves into it, and we think it's a very interesting topic. So take it away.
Yeah, I mean, identity politics is a really fascinating conversation for one reason mainly, is that it focuses so much on the idea of offence, and what's offensive and what's not offensive. And sort of, I think, and the reason I find it so interesting is because people saying I identify as this, in and of itself, isn't too interesting. We've been identifying all our lives, all that stuff. Like one of the first, but what's interesting is how not only we've changed what we use to identify ourselves, but also how people react to that.
Well, I'm sure not everyone that listens to this will know exactly what identity politics is. So if you could give us more of a broader description, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, identity politics is the idea of what, I mean, how would I describe it? It's the idea of politicizing and talking about like how people identify. So it's the idea of and the problems people have with that. And really that it's as simple as that. A lot of it is often associated with gender and sexual identity, and how their identity affects other people, and other people taking offence to it.
Did you do a dissertation?
Yeah, so my dissertation was on gender in Roman, in Ovid's Metamorphoses, and trying to look at how gender in there could be representative of how gender was understood in the Roman time, specifically at the turn of the millennium.
So that's quite interesting. Is that why you became?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things I became really interested in it. There was loads of sexual politics happening at uni. Bristol, which is where I went to, was like a real hub for that. It was a really interesting place because I was sort of like semi-ostracised from the LGBT plus community there, because I was like a right-wing private school boy. So there were a lot of people who were like, "Oh, you're a conservative scum." And there was points where I was like, this is supposed to be a safe space for me, and I was ostracised out of it. But then, because people are sort of like, you don't deserve to have an opinion because you're a white privileged male. And people saying, well, I'm this, that, this, and the other, so you can possibly understand how I feel, and therefore my opinion. Well, they didn't say this, and if you ask them, they're like, no, that's not what I meant at all. It would eventually come back to the idea of like, therefore, because I identify as all these major things, I'm allowed more, right to have a say than you are. You're not allowed to have an opinion, or your opinion doesn't matter, because it's not as valuable as mine, because mine is more marginalised. I think that's the other thing, is sort of within identity politics, is not only how to identify, but how marginalised are you, how much privilege do you have?
Yeah, that is, it could be seen as sort of a bit of a problem, because the whole idea of these groups who come together as a safe space for the LGBTQ communities is to give everyone a say and everyone a voice, but it almost counteracts that when some people who aren't necessarily needing that voice as much don't have that voice anymore.
Yeah,
and I find that especially with like the BBC, for example. Yeah. Then everyone, they have to give everyone a chance, and it's fair enough to give everyone a chance. It's fair, but is there a point where you have to stop that? Like, there has to just be a point where the best person for the best job.
Yeah, and I mean, this is why I find it really interesting. This way it gets really complex and really interesting. Is sort of, if you've got two people with the same credentials, and actually you've got someone who is a privileged, straight white male and confident and has all these privileges attached to them, and on paper they're the exact same person, but this one is really like outgoing, really chatty, really easy to get on with, and just like a really great person to have around, versus someone who's not, perfectly lovely, but has come from a much harder working background, is like, they can do the job well and then lovely, but this other person's like, oh, they just want to have them around the office, and the other person is like, they can do the job, and actually our quota suggests that we're more favourable towards that person anyway. should we be employing the person who doesn't fit the privilege role just because we need to get our quota up? And then, and then it's the other thing about, well, this person could fit better in the office, this person has a better fit with the culture. But then what are you saying about your culture of your company?
Do you think that's happening a lot with companies, that they're just trying to fill quotas?
I don't think it is. I think that's an really extreme example. And I don't think it is.
It's been illegal for a while, surely.
Well, quotas have become a thing. And those are important. And it's not, and it's always going to be tricky, and because a lot of the way that companies will process people allows for individual opinion, allows for character over traits, and allows for, we just don't think that'd be a good fit. And so, and it is always tricky, and that was a really kind of an extreme example of a minor case. But I think generally there will be a ploy to encourage a more diverse workspace. And I mean, actually it has been proven that the more diverse a workspace you have, the better the company does. Just because and diverse is, such a broad word, not just, ethnically, or in terms of gender or anything like that, as in just having lots of people with lots of different backgrounds and experiences trying to achieve the same thing provides a more profitable company. So actually that has been proven, and that is a thing. But
is that been proven at certain firms? Or?
Yeah, so it was a study, I can't remember now, but it was certainly something that I did an internship over the summer with Smith and Williamson, and they showed me this article which was a scientific study, and obviously the bigger the firm and the more diverse people you can have, the more it's applicable. And a small firm 5 people, while it could be profitable, if you've got loads of diverse people at the same time, it's such a small group of people, you're not trying to achieve the same goals as a multi-million-dollar corporation. So that's one of the really tricky things. And one of the things that I always found really interesting was how people felt of that they get enough. It's is this what we're doing now?
It's tribalism.
Yeah, and Ben, we had that debate the other day about the rainbow poppy, which the only thing that I found really interesting about it was that the reaction from not just you, but quite a few of people was just, God, the gays have enough.
Yeah,
and I'd be interested to see what your thoughts were on
So the rainbow poppy, what was that? Was that?
Ben,
it wasn't actually ever really a thing.
No.
Someone listed a rainbow poppy on eBay, and they got a lot of abuse from it because people didn't see it as a necessary thing. So what we debated was that was it a necessary thing? Was that the question?
I think the question we settled on was the rainbow poppy is a valid form of is a valid act of remembrance.
Yes.
And we were against that proposition.
Yeah, we were against it, but we came from a different angle.
Yeah.
We were saying that the red poppy unites people anyway, so there's not really much of a need for a rainbow poppy.
But even in our research stage,
you
and then I spoke to a couple others of Grace and S later, and they the first thing was the gays already have a month. Why do they need a poppy as well?
That did come up, but I disagree with that in a way, because we found out during the research that at the time they were persecuted much more.
Right. Yeah.
There was one guy who was castrated, wasn't he, for just being gay. So that was a big argument on their side to say that they deserve a rainbow poppy because they weren't necessarily recognised at the time for fighting for their country, and they had to sort of hide away what their feelings. Otherwise they'd be at risk of being killed.
But then as well you had correct me if I'm wrong, but the poppy also represents the Jewish community. So there's not a Jewish poppy, is there?
I'm not sure about that, but what we found out is that there are actually a bunch of different coloured poppies. So there's a black poppy that represents the African Americans and, well, not African Americans, so just the black people that fought in the war. There's a white poppy, is that for animals?
The white poppy was just like for peace.
White poppy for peace. Maybe the purple
There was like a
one.
purple one
for animals. There were a bunch of different poppies which.
And then there was the black poppy for ethnic minorities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are a bunch of poppies already which represent different minorities and groups of people.
Yeah.
What's wrong with one poppy that just represents everyone in society?
And then that's when we get into the really interesting stuff,
Surely
which
that
is
would then segregate people because
Yeah.
it's them showing that they needed something different. So
Precisely.
if you had one thing, should that bring everyone together then?
right. No, exactly, and that is the idea. And I think in many like utopian ideals, everyone's like, no, we just strip away all the identifying marks and we're just one people. But then it does then get down to, hang on, I can't be angry at you because you're just like me, when in fact you have all of these things which are different and go against what I believe and how I live my life. Yeah. Either because the classic one in the UK actually is the class one at the moment.
Definitely.
Right, the general election, you've got left versus the right, you've got Eat the Rich is getting more and more popular. It's almost like a meme now to be like, we need people to get the guillotines out. The revolution has begun. I mean, when I was at school, I was at Eton, and Eton has become like a focal point of class distress
After the Prime Minister.
after all 20th and now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite stressful. I was like, we don't need. I was wondering, I wonder if like that could ever be something I do. And then I thought, nah, they don't need another Etonian there. We're good. But we had a protest one day, and there was like, and we had someone, the leader, this guy called Ian Bone, was an anarchist, and the chant was, "Class war's the only war." And it was a really interesting idea that actually, like, why are there some people who have more than other people, and is it fair, and how they live their lives, is it fair? We have to struggle and we have to fight and we have to do all of this just to live our lives, and you're there sitting pretty with copious amounts of money. So I mean that's the other thing is, identity isn't as simple as what you can see. It's it's how you believe about things and what you believe. I'm a socialist, I'm a conservative,
Would you say that recently identity politics might be almost overtaking and possibly ruining politics to an extent?
Yeah. If you ask me at the beginning of uni, I'd be like, no, it's doing great things for democracy, and it's really doing the right things, and I'd say now it is, yeah. I think, but at the same time, I think it's a necessary evil, in the sense that we've gone from almost like a sort of zeitgeist attitude of like, there was like a general attitude that no, we are one people, come by our, and anyone who didn't fit in that one people, screw them. It was like, oh no, they're not important if they don't fit with how we imagine. So in many ways, it is important to recognise everyone, to recognise how we're different. And I think it has gone too far, but I think it's a necessary evil, and any time something like this, any time there's societal change, it always goes a little too far the other way.
It goes down to cultural appropriation.
Right.
It needs to happen in order to go back to the middle.
Right. I mean, I remember when when racism was the big thing, and everyone was like, I can't be racist. And it's like, oh, that's racist. Oh, that's racist. And like everyone's petrified of being racist, and everything was called racist. And then we've come back to now and be like, no, we're pretty comfortable with what's racist and what's not now. We have to get to the really difficult like, is that racist, and ponder it, like theoretically, before we can say. And I think in many ways, society and culture is changing, and I think we've just gone a little bit too far the other way, and we'll come back the other way in time. And I don't think it will ruin democracy, but I think it has changed democracy dramatically, and it has forced politicians to assess how they view the world, how they present their views to the world, for fear of offence. But I think for me, the big worry, most interesting thing is how people identify themselves in relation to offence.
Yeah,
And
people take offence for anything.
Yeah, and I think people have always taken offence for anything, and people will say, but the problem with offence is that you might not be offensive to someone, you might not intend to offend them at all. That person can still take it as offence, and you cannot control that in how you speak to them. The best you can hope for is that they approach you in a calm manner and say, hey, I found that offensive, and you say, oh God, I didn't mean to, and you can resolve it.
Yeah.
But you then get onto Twitter and trolling, and we've got 280 characters to pass an opinion across and react to something. You don't have the same time to process, especially when you sort of say, this is how I feel in a fit of anger, and then before you can even calm down and think, actually, do I process it? That's now open to the world, and you either get a massive amount of validation for that, or a massive amount of hate. Neither of which is conducive to good thought and good reflection. Because either you don't reflect and you get loads of people saying, that's a great idea, and you're like, yeah, it is a great idea, regardless of whether it is or not.
Yeah.
Or you get loads of hating,
Yeah.
and you sort of think, ooh, maybe it's actually, not only is this not a good idea, I now feel awful about myself for it. So there's very little room for error, which is actually the worst thing,
It's very difficult for anyone to publicly say a lot of things in
Yeah.
without getting slated by certain groups. It doesn't matter who you are.
Cancel culture.
Massive. I hate the cancel culture.
Yeah.
I mean, again, 2 years ago, I'd be like, they're cancelled, they're trash, we hate them,
Yeah.
and that's it. I mean, I'll do that now, but that's a massive joke, because the cancel culture is awful. I think it does a good thing in it says, hey, that's not okay.
Yeah.
But the Kevin Hart thing, for me, is a prime example of someone who writes consistently on Twitter all day, every day, for 10 years. They wrote something awful 10 years ago, which doesn't stop it being awful, is bad, but they weren't called out for it, and after time then it didn't matter. And if he wasn't going to be called out then, why 10 years later someone has grown, someone has developed, their attitude has changed, they are different people. Whoever you were 10 years ago is not the same person you are 10 years later.
With cancel culture, is that just shutting down?
Yeah, so the idea that you find out that someone somewhere along in their history, either recent or long term, has said something disastrous or done something wrong, and you go, right, they're a despicable human being, they're cancelled, we'll give them nothing. And we're sort of like, no, and it's sort of the idea of like, yeah, they're no longer important, they no longer have any value, which I think is again probably like an oversimplification of what it is, but and quite harsh of me to say they have no value. But that's the essence of cancel culture, is like who they are, what they do is cancelled, our belief in them is cancelled.
Do you think that's going to get worse as social media sort of progresses?
I think I don't think it'll get worse. I think as social media progresses, people become more understanding that there's no point to it. There's no point bringing up someone's past. People often regret their past, and there's no point bringing that up because you may still be offended, but not as deeply.
I feel like it's already reached a line.
I think I agree.
It's kind of just been like it started coming into like up here. So so you teach everyone that obviously don't put dumb stuff on your Snapchat story. Because it will come back to you, and then we all know that.
But but that's the thing. My worry is that actually we are young when young people, make stupid mistakes, and that's a normal, healthy process of living.
But ours is safe forever. Our mistakes.
Right, which is something which is both great and awful in that, and the whole, teaching. Everyone will have their own opinion on learning, teaching, but the best way to learn is by making mistakes, working out what doesn't work, and then reflecting and working out, okay, that didn't work, what about this? Oh, that now works, cool, and that's how you change, and that's really important. Making errors is really important, and I think it's, and when we look at people like Boris Johnson or anyone in the media now.
I
David Cameron,
respected him much more when I found out what happened with that pit.
Right.
Because
it's more.
I don't respect him anymore. But when I found out, it's like he's only human. Like, he made mistakes, and people are slating him for that. But why? Like, it may be quite ridiculous, and for most people, including myself, it's like, wow, that's grim, mate. Don't do that. But it shows he's a human. He's just a normal.
And I think that's the thing. With, I think it's really important that people feel they can fail, feel that that they can make mistakes and it doesn't hinder them. Which is the problem with cancel culture, is that it doesn't allow for growth. And I think you're right. People are generally becoming more aware of social media and social media things. I think there is a more educational attitude towards social media. It used to be clickbaiting it's still becoming more like as much of a thing as it was 2 years ago, but people are sort of getting better at actually, I've seen this title, that doesn't mean that's the whole story. Let me try and work out what the whole story is before I form a life-changing opinion on it.
But the new worrying thing is deepfakes, isn't it? Because
deepfakes, what?
Do you know what?
No.
So a deepfake is where someone sort of they upload a load of footage of like a particular person like Boris Johnson into a computer, and then they are able to control what he says and what his face says. So that sort of thing. So they made one where Boris Johnson basically like backs the Labour Party and basically said all his policies are terrible and you should go vote for Labour. But someone had made that, but at the end he revealed that he was a deepfake. But people are being tricked by these, and I don't blame them because they're so realistic, and there's no way of telling. Like Google and Facebook have tried to make like algorithms and things that see if it's a deepfake, and they can't tell. And so that's going to be the new clickbait because it's just going to be spread.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
It is. It's terrifying.
You will believe it, and then eventually, like, why do I believe that?
Because there's always been media manipulation. That's been around for ages, but that's a whole new level.
Yeah.
It's a whole.
I actually read about this recently. So, like, there's been loads of media manipulation, especially in the 1930s. So when they kind of first discovered the cannabis stuff, I can't really remember who it was at the time, but he essentially just pumped millions and millions into making like wacky comedies about what like cannabis stuff. So like you all know like Pineapple Express, so stuff like that. But 1930s films and all the bad things. And then they also had like and basically just put a horrible name on it. And even to this day, it's still like a horrible name on it, and stuff like hemp as well, which is just an all natural thing. Make like bags out of it, and even though, because there's no internet or anything, all you had in the 30s was libraries, so they just control the media and just
and in the same way, we teach in PSRE now. You look at the media on tobacco and like look how healthy and like social and fun this is. And it's like, and now I don't know about you guys, my image of tobacco is the one person who still smokes a cigarette standing outside in the rain at a party because it's like they need their nicotine fix. I mean, obviously vaping is now a thing, so they need that less and less, but it's that was certainly my image for like a long time compared to I think how it was initially presented. And so media manipulation is always really scary. And I think that's the other thing where, getting back to identity politics, where it gets really quite terrifying, is someone making us, someone saying something well intentioned, but in the process unintentionally offending someone. I think, we have, and not being allowed to make that mistake and having someone say, hey, this is how you should say it, and them going, oh, okay, and then doing it that way. And I think it's an ignorance thing or an uneducated thing. And either way, the problem with those things is that they're really emotional trigger words. So even though it is true that someone is just simply not educated in why things are offensive, why you can't refer to gay people as, I don't want to say it, but the F word, and why you can't call transgender people, why transgender is the right word to call transgender people, it's often just because they haven't been educated, they are ignorant of
Do you think
what's happening.
society nowadays has become too like worried about what to say or worried about the consequence of things? So if we look like 20 years ago, everyone was smoking and no one thought a second about it.
Yeah.
And then it was almost like you could say more what you can say then than you can now almost, because there wasn't as much like backing behind your consequences, if you know what I mean.
I
do you
think
society's become too worried or too
but, I
careful?
mean that's a good question. I think in many ways it's a good thing that society is trying to take a moment to think about it. That there is that pause. Oh, is this offensive? I think in many ways that is healthy because it's still in the process of learning and there's still so much information out there, and some people say, well, this is fine and that's not fine, and I think as long as anything you do, you try and do with respect and with the right intentions. It's not you should never really be getting in too much trouble for that. But I think, and I don't think it will get worse. I don't think it will get to a stage where people feel like they can't say anything.
Yeah.
But I think it will. I think people now are just. I don't think it will. I think we're at it now. I don't think it will get too much worse than where we're at now, because if it does, then we get into really dangerous, like, I don't want to say Nazi-esque, but we get into a very limited.
Orwellian.
Yeah.
Like thought police.
Yeah, the thought police,
So-
and like 1984, and so like you can't. It's like, oh, I didn't say that. No, but you thought it,
Yeah.
and it's sort of like, again, that's like being quite fanatical about something, quite dramatic. But I don't think it will get there, and I'm worried if it will, because I think free speech is important. I mean, then free speech gets really interesting.
Yeah.
We don't have free speech.
Do you not think we do?
I don't think
To an extent we do, but we don't have total free speech. We have free speech until you offend someone.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Well, I think free speech, people are often confused by what it is. I think we do, but I think we have gotten into trickier territory than we have been. I think we do ultimately have free speech, but I think any limits on free speech, such as hate speech, exist not to stifle thought and expression and people making errors.
Stifle radicalism.
It's to stifle radicalism, and more importantly, it's the kind of idea that everyone in the UK has agreed as citizens that we are here that we respect one another, and we respect each other's opinions, and that we respect who each other are. And hate speech is when you stop respecting other people.
Well, conversely, that could go the other way, because if somebody genuinely disagrees with, well, for example, there are a large number of people who disagree with transgender as a topic. Like it's not that they don't understand it; they just don't agree with it. But people not accepting that disagreement on the other side, is that classified as hate speech as well?
I think.
Because that's not respecting
Well,
their
then it gets to the thing where it goes from are you saying that to someone who's transgendered? I don't think I don't think trans people should exist. I think you're mentally ill, you're wrong. That's a very different thing to someone saying, in a private space, I'm not sure about it. It doesn't make sense to me and I'm confused. This is why I think it's wrong. That's free speech. It turns into hate speech when you're yelling at someone and you're persistently saying and accusing people and saying you're not valid in my view, and my view is more important than your view. I think that's where it goes from free speech to hate speech.
But then
Exercising.
is saying that to the person who is a transgender, like that person who is transgender could completely disrespect that other person's hate speech, even though it is hate speech. It is regarded as hate speech. They're still disrespecting that opinion, which almost undermines.
No. But then that's the thing, is that's where I think I see what you're saying. That's where it gets wrong. In that case, trans people aren't disagreeing they're disagreeing with the opinion, and that's fine. Disagreements and differences in opinion are good.
But protesting against their opinion.
But the problem, the change is, and this is where identity politics gets messy, and again, is it turns from, do you have criticism with the opinion or with the person? And that's where it gets tricky. If it's free speech is saying, here's my opinion. Hate speech is saying, here's my opinion on you as a human being. And that's where it gets really tricky with identity politics, because at what point do you have a difference of opinion? And at what point do you have a difference of opinion of people? That's where identity politics gets really tricky and messy, because it's when it stops being about opinion and it starts being about human validity.
So if you say that free speech is about giving your opinion, and then hate speech is about giving your opinion about someone, is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
But then how do you? But then if you say we're on the topic of trans people, if you give your opinion about trans people, at just the topic of trans people, how do you not offend them to give your own free speech?
You've got to talk about gender theory. You can't talk about, because when you talk about the people and it's very easy to offend people when you get into stereotypes and backwards ideals, especially when you don't know trans people personally.
Yeah.
And you're just saying, well, I've seen them on the news and these are my opinions and I think they're wrong. That's one thing. It's then a different thing to say, well, look, this is how I've understood gender theory and this is my approach and I think this is where the breakdowns are. That's that's exercising free speech and having a difference in opinion. That's not promoting hate speech.
But that is an ideal world.
Yeah, no, and
The truth is, there'll never be an ideal perfect
No,
world.
and this is
There's always going to be people who dislike other people, and people who are radically aggressive, passive aggressive, whether it's aggressive speech or aggressive actions to other people, and that will always happen. That's something society is just going to have to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's where utopia as a word is really interesting. Do you know this? So do you know what utopia stands for?
Perfect.
What does it stand for?
So not stands for, that makes sound like an acronym, but as in it's a word founded in Greek, and the whole point of it is that it's got two roots in Greek. So topos means place, so the idea of topia means place. Dis, so we have with dystopia being that's a bad place. This literally means bad, so bad place. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The U could either mean so the good place, hence the show, the good place, or U, meaning not a place. So it creates this idea that a utopia is a fundamental ideal which is everyone tries to reach for, but it cannot exist. It does not exist.
So people don't actually know.
So a
Utopia. Two
utopia.
meanings,
So the U. So what's really funny is that the U, in Greek, either has an E before it or an O before it. If it has an E, it means good. If it has an O, it means not. So
a place that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Or it can mean a good place. It depends how you view that.
So that's kind of saying there's a good place that doesn't exist if you put them together.
So the idea is that it both means it is a good place and it doesn't exist, and that's when utopias get really interesting because it's sort of flaws. Flaws exist. Even in dystopias, it's not totally awful. There are good things, or at least there can be found some remnant of goodness, and that can be changed into a normal topotopia. But then the idea of utopia is so. In reaching utopia, there must be flaws.
It seems that seems like it's kind of bred into human genetics though, because so for example like Bill Gates, he has all the money in the world.
Yeah.
Whatever. He has everything. He's a loving family or whatever. But he went through cancer, didn't he? Didn't he beat cancer?
I don't personally know.
I don't know.
Okay.
He was really ill.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
You sure it wasn't Steve Jobs?
No, it definitely was
Okay.
Steve Jobs. Anyway.
Anyway.
But yes, basically, even though his life is so perfect, I don't think he's constantly happy.
No one is.
Oh well, happiness I think again is a flaw. Like I think the idea. So there's different types of happiness. I think there's contentness. You know, are you happy?
Satisfied.
Are you satisfied? Are you physically satisfied? Are you spiritually satisfied? I think those are all things that you can be more satisfied than other things in some cases rather than other cases. But I think the idea of are you happy? Are my children? You know, the big thing is like I just want my children to be happy. Fundamentally, there's some fundamental flaws in that you cannot be happy without being sad. You can't know what happiness is without knowing what sadness is. You can be content in that you aren't miserable and you are like satisfied, but to be happy you need to know what sad is, and you need the bad times to know the good times and vice versa. You need the good times to know when it's bad. So
I read somewhere that said like, so if you go cold water swimming, like ice cold water swimming, because it makes you so miserable and horrible. It's a really good way for people with depression because you come out and feel so happy because you've been so cold and miserable within the water, so you feel sadness, and then you come out because it's like such a relief to come out. You just feel like happier than ever. Well, not than ever, but like happier than before. So that's like one of those things where it's showing like you have to be sad and like feel that like pain and miserable to then know what happiness is.
Well, that also explains why like when people are grieving, it's good for them to get all their emotions out and talk to people. Because then afterwards it's off them.
Yeah, which is why it's any time you are emotional, any time you're trying to suppress it, they don't. It gets worse because they haven't had that experience of going down. And so then their body's like, no, we're supposed to be going down now. We're like, you're emotionally, no, we need a down point. And then it just, then it builds up, needing the down point. So I think that's a cool thing about happiness. But so I think not to conclude, but going back to identity politics, I think identity politics is then, actually along the happiness line, I don't know how much time we've got left, but along that happiness line, the flaw with identity politics is that, and I think for a lot of people, is that they then find satisfaction and joy and contentment in their identity. Instead of like, I don't know who I was, and then I found this group of people, I found this, and this is important to me. This is where I form my identity around. And they stick to that, and they find it. I found my contentness in this thing that is marginalised and that you don't like. So I'm basing my identity around that, about bringing that up. And I think it's an unhealthy relationship with identity. I was watching what was it called? It's like, do you think I'm fat, or are you calling me fat? There's a 2-part documentary series thing.
I think I may have seen that.
Which I found really interesting, and I genuinely thought it was scripted. That it was like that you had this one woman who was like using all this language that I've come to listen to and break down with a lot of in sort of gender and feminist movements. Third wave is all of the vocabulary that you hear in second and third wave feminism, which is rebelling against societal oppression. And I was sort of like, I mean, you're fat. I don't think you're not. I don't think society thinks less of you because you're fat. And I think, if anything, there's also a difference between being fat and being obese. And I think, but it was this, there were people who were like, no, I'm fat and I'm proud. And it was sort of, and I was sort of like, oh, seems quite unhealthy because your whole identity seems to be around the fact that you're fat. Not, I can tell you anything about who you are other than you annoy me because of how much you want to tell me you're fat. So I think that's where identity politics gets not only messy but also aggravating for a lot of people. Is that it stops being about here's the thing. It's about your identity. It's like, hang on, it's not even about who you are. It's about one aspect that you're trying to defiantly hold on to, which is taking away from something.
that's where social media sort of comes a bit bad in that sense, because some people I know following like Fox News only, or like some sort of Facebook group which only posts this type of point of view, only this perspective, and they get locked into this sort of one mindset, and then everything outside that is fake news or wrong, which is just really toxic and damaging, because we haven't really had this before in maybe the last 20 years or so, because before that you had maybe one or two news channels, you had newspapers, and you couldn't you could, but it was more difficult to follow one point of view. And I think that's a huge issue at the moment with identity politics, is some people's inability to accept other people's point of view.
Yeah, and I think, so like both sides of the spectrum, as it were, any time there's like a problem with identity politics, it's usually because two people refuse to listen to each other, and actually is both refusing to listen to each other's opinions, and then refusing to accept that they are valid enough to have an opinion. And I think that's ultimately where I think breaks down, because I think, you need diversity, you need differences of opinion, they're all important. It's just then changing your perspective on what is opinion and what's a difference, what's an opinion versus what is, a view on whether that opinion is valid.
But that almost brings up the question of whether opinions are subjective or objective,
in what way?
Oh, yeah, so we've been discussing this in theory.
Because if you think about it, an opinion should be something that's completely subjective and individual to each person. But can you have a wrong opinion or a right opinion? Or because for certainly, if someone thinks that, for example, it's healthy to be dangerously obese, that is, for me personally, a wrong opinion. It's not healthy, and you should be trying, if you can, to do something about it.
Because there's a completely objective scale that shows healthy weight, underweight, and then obese. So it's sort of like, so they're kind of just like almost in a way ignoring the objective. That's why people find that opinion wrong, because it's ignoring the objective scale.
I mean, I think the hardest, I see what you're saying. I think when I hear something like that, my opinion is like an informed opinion versus an uninformed opinion. So that's where, and I get where it gets tricky, when someone can have like a right opinion, but that's still misinformed. It's sort of like, is that opinion still right, even though it hasn't been fully informed?
What do you mean by misinformed right opinion?
So the idea that you can come to the right conclusion, but your methodology was completely false, kind of thing. It's sort of like, well, you've got here and you agree with me. I like that you agree with me, but the reason you agree with me is fundamentally wrong. It's sort of like, I'm trying to think of an example now, but sort of like the idea that gay people are fine. Like, oh, what a great thing to say. Yeah, because like women are like, the sexes don't belong to be mixed together, so of course like you need men to be with men and women to be with women. That's how it should be. And you're like, oh no, how you got there is completely wrong. And it's sort of like, that's where it's sort of like, oh, right opinion, but still misinformed. And so it's like, is that right? Is that opinion? Is that still right, even though it's been completely misinformed?
Who decides if it's misinformed?
Well, the only thing that I would say is,
then it just keeps going.
You can, I was about to then say something else, but you can just spiral from there. So like, well, how much information have they had to go off? And then you're sort of like, well, when's enough information?